Do you understand what just happened? Brazil has abruptly halted trade with the United States, directly humiliating Donald Trump amid soaring prices, empty supermarket shelves, and a president who proclaims himself a business genius. The harsh reality of a superpower, losing access to essential products like coffee, soybeans, meat, steel, and sugar, is revealed because one man thought he could dominate the world through tariffs. Imagine that for a moment. Millions of Americans waking up to no coffee, meat prices rising uncontrollably, construction projects stalled due to the lack of Brazilian iron ore. It sounds like an economic nightmare, but it is the tangible reality. And this is where the true political impact of this story lies. What was sold as a America First strategy has now turned into a America Alone catastrophe. The truth is that Brazil, under Lula's leadership, has made a complete turnaround. While Trump bet on confrontation, Brazil signed multi-million-dollar deals with Asia, Europe, and Africa. China opened its markets, Europe invested billions, and African countries began receiving sugar and ethanol at a scale Washington never wanted to accept. Suddenly, it became clear that Brazil is no longer a vassal of the United States, but a significant global player. This shift in trade acts has sent shockwaves through international politics, demonstrating how quickly an old ally can become a rival when arrogance and imposition dominate. Trump believed pressure and threats would force respect, but instead, they only awakened resistance, and that resistance has transformed the geopolitical map. The escalation is very tangible in the daily lives of American citizens. Coffee, once a common and accessible product, is now a luxury item. Supermarkets raise prices on staples like eggs, milk, and meat due to the absence of Brazilian soy for animal feed. American drivers see how sugar and ethanol increase fuel costs, and the construction industry suffers from exorbitant steel and iron prices that used to come cheaply from Brazil. This chain of consequences is the direct legacy of Trump's policy, a decision with devastating consequences that triggers a domino effect within the White House, shaking the entire society. What Lula managed intelligently was the exact timing. He took advantage of the void left by Trump's tariffs to quickly forge alliances. Thus, Brazil went from being a mere supplier to a strategic partner for entire continents. For the United States, on the other hand, it meant isolation. Companies dependent on Brazilian raw materials now openly rebel against Washington. Farmers who cannot maintain production without imported soy sound alarms. Consumers complain about empty shelves and prices that keep rising. An absolute chaos unfolds, which at the same time symbolizes the fall of a policy based on showing power rather than seeking collaboration. The question everyone should ask is, was it really a mistake? Was it a whim of Trump's or a necessary wake-up call for the United States to understand it can no longer impose the rules of global trade? Moreover, this historic rupture will be recorded as the moment America definitively lost its economic dominance. Trump tried to show strength, but what he left was evident weakness. His tariffs against Brazil supposedly aimed to protect American jobs, but in reality triggered an unprecedented response. Suddenly, Brazil ceased to be a mere petitioner in Washington and became an equal-weight actor in Beijing, Brussels, and Africa. While American consumers struggled to find coffee and meat, Chinese and European investors celebrate the multi-million-dollar contracts falling into their hands. Lula seized this opportunity to radically transform Brazil's image, going from a simple, raw material supplier to a confident commercial power. It is no coincidence that international media already speak of a geopolitical turning point. The break with the United States is not just an economic event, but a clear political message. It shows that those who try to rule the world with threats end up losing control. The most striking thing is that this crisis directly affects the daily lives of the American population. In supermarkets, prices skyrocket. Meat and coffee are scarce, and sugar becomes a luxury product. At gas stations, citizens see ethanol prices soar. In construction, projects stop due to the lack of steel imports. Week after week, pressure on the government in Washington increases. Business associations warn of massive layoffs. The agricultural sector denounces the collapse of supply chains. Consumers protest empty shelves. This scenario resembles a disaster caused by internal decisions. The political responsibility is clear. Trump was the one who initiated this crisis with his tariffs. The international reaction also reveals a lot. While the United States staggers, China and Europe strengthen their influence. Africa benefits from large contracts for sugar and ethanol. Asia secures its supply of meat and soy, and Europe gains access to shipments of steel and iron ore that were previously reserved for the United States. The emerging image is clear. The former superpower is sidelined while Brazil occupies a central place in a new global trade order. It is especially ironic that Trump always presented himself as an expert in negotiating deals. However, his strategy in Brazil has become a clear worldwide example of a self-inflicted mistake because instead of showing strength, it has exposed dependencies Washington ignored for years. The United States heavily depends on agricultural products, raw materials, and energy from Brazil, and without these imports, an entire economic model would collapse. This is precisely the situation Americans face day by day. The political consequences are equally impactful. Experts talk about a profound loss of confidence in American leadership. Allies who once followed Washington's directives unquestioningly now begin to doubt. If a country like Brazil can resist pressure and emerge stronger, why should others continue obeying unconditionally? This question divides the international diplomatic scene. What remains is a United States more isolated than ever. Never before has a U.S. president become so openly a symbol of economic failure as now, with Donald Trump at the center. His tariff policy, presented as a patriotic defense of the national industry, has turned out to be an accelerator of the crisis shaking the entire country. For a long time, Brazil was seen by Washington simply as a raw material supplier, but now it has reversed the game and demonstrated that other options exist. Alternatives that China, Europe, and Africa have enthusiastically embraced. In contrast, indignation grows in the United States. Millions of citizens feel betrayed because they have paid the price for a poorly thought-out strategy based solely on the arrogance and ego of one man. The media increasingly describe Trump not as a negotiator, but as a deal-breaker. Experts point out that the dependence on Brazilian products was underestimated for years. Almost half of the coffee consumed in the United States traditionally comes from Brazil, as does a large part of the imported soy. Meat, sugar, ethanol, and steel are other key elements of this close interdependence. By cutting these ties, Brazil has created a gap in the U.S. economy that will be difficult to fill quickly. While the population desperately seeks answers, Trump remains silent or downplays the crisis. But this very attitude worsens the situation because people feel in their daily lives that something fundamental has changed. Coffee is rationed, meat prices soar, and the industry is laying off workers. This is not a distant theory, but the tangible reality in U.S. cities and communities. The political damage transcends borders. Latin America watches closely as Brazil frees itself from U.S. dominance and becomes a role model. Other countries understand that they no longer have to automatically depend on Washington but can forge new alliances.
Lo que comenzó como un éxito económico con los tomates de alta calidad se transformó en una herramienta de influencia global. Cada acuerdo comercial no solo llena almacenes y contenedores, sino que también redefine el escenario diplomático internacional. Países que antes dependían de Estados Unidos para asegurar sus suministros alimentarios ahora dirigen su atención hacia México. Alemania ha ajustado su calendario de importaciones en función de las decisiones que toman los productores mexicanos. Japón establece negociaciones directas con proveedores ubicados en Sinaloa y Baja California. Incluso naciones del Medio Oriente están diversificando sus compras, alejándose de su histórica dependencia en mercados tradicionales para apostar por México. Este impacto se percibe claramente en Washington. Cada envío, cada nuevo contrato, cerrado con Asia o Europa, representa un recordatorio constante de que México ha dejado de ser un aliado pasivo y ahora es un jugador clave que determina quién recibe alimentos, quién paga más y quién debe esperar. La Casa Blanca revisa sus estrategias, pero ya no puede ejercer la presión de antes. Los supermercados en Europa y Asia ya tienen sus acuerdos firmados y no están dispuestos a modificarlos ante amenazas. Y no se trata únicamente de tomates. Pimientos, berries y aguacates provenientes de México se han convertido en piezas fundamentales dentro de un juego de poder. Controlar el suministro se traduce en obtener influencia política. Cada tonelada exportada abre la puerta a negociaciones estratégicas donde el valor económico se convierte en capacidad de maniobra frente a mercados y gobiernos alrededor del mundo. México no solo comercializa alimentos, también ofrece seguridad alimentaria y confianza, obligando a los antiguos dominadores a reconsiderar su posición. Este movimiento silencioso, meticuloso y altamente lucrativo transforma a México en una nación que ya no depende de Estados Unidos. Ahora es quien establece las reglas, fija precios, define condiciones y organiza su calendario de exportaciones sin necesidad de recurrir a la fuerza. La agricultura mexicana ha evolucionado hasta convertirse en una potencia económica y diplomática que redefine las normas del comercio mundial. Mientras México celebra contratos millonarios, se abre un panorama que pocos imaginaron. Los tomates premium se han convertido en una llave que abre puertas comerciales antes cerradas. No es solo Estados Unidos quien observa con preocupación. Compradores en Canadá, Reino Unido y Emiratos Árabes Unidos comienzan a reestructurar sus contratos para priorizar la calidad mexicana. Cada kilo vendido no solo genera ingresos, sino también influencia. Lo que antes era un producto común, ahora es un activo estratégico global capaz de transformar relaciones comerciales y políticas. Pero México no se conforma con esto. La diversificación de productos avanza rápidamente. Pepinos, pimientos, berries y aguacates se suman al portafolio premium, consolidando una corriente constante de exportaciones que garantiza ingresos por cientos de millones de dólares anuales. Los precios, cuidadosamente ajustados, oscilan entre 2.5 y 3 por kilo en Europa, mientras que en Asia los berries y aguacates alcanzan cifras históricas gracias a su calidad y frescura inigualables. Cada contrato que se firma envía un mensaje fuerte y silencioso. México no solo participa en el mercado global, sino que impone estándares y marca el rumbo. La logística se ha transformado en una herramienta silenciosa pero poderosa. Se despliegan rutas alternativas mediante puertos estratégicos, garantizando que los envíos lleguen frescos y puntuales incluso frente a barreras arancelarias o demoras planificadas. Esta capacidad de adaptación demuestra que México ha evolucionado, dejando de ser un mero espectador para convertirse en un jugador inteligente dentro de un tablero complejo. Cada camión que cruza la frontera no solo transporta fruta, sino también autoridad, respeto y una visión a largo plazo que revoluciona la manera en que un país puede competir en mercados internacionales.